speaker I probably know least in the group, but I've talked to her many times over the years, and we've tabled together, or we've conventioned together, because she works with her husband on promoting the Independent Institute at many different places, and one of which is the Freedom Fest conventions every year, which I highly recommend in Las Vegas. Kui goes to those too, so they're pretty incredible places, and they keep growing. So, but she's the senior vice president of the Independent Institute. She has a BA in economics from Stanford. I won't hold that against her, though. She's the managing director of Lighting Ventures, limited partnership in San Francisco. She's been a director of 9 different corporations. That's really something. And she just, her resume just goes on and on and on. She's written many things. She's spoken. And the speaker we had last year, who did a tremendous job, Colleen Haight. And I really urge you to watch the talks if you have time from last year on YouTube. I can send you the link. Recommended our next speaker. So I said, that's good enough for me. Please welcome Mary Theroux.
There. Thank you. Well, thank you. It's really, what a great idea, Patrick. This is really wonderful to get together and celebrate von Mises, who I just adore and is such, as you pointed out, was so courageous and such a wonderful exponent of fundamental principles and truths that I hopefully stand us all in good stead. To me, the best thing about von Mises' work is it provides a framework within which to make sense of the world around us. And I've been very grateful to have that, and especially to make sense of history and history unfolding day by day. We don't have to fall prey to all these nutty theories that come out every day and think, oh, is that what's causing that? No, that's not what's causing that. So Mises is just, I love him and I could talk forever, but there are scholars here who could do a better job. So I was assigned to talk about thesis of my career, which is going to be kind of interesting. I have the distinct good luck to have been born in Wichita, Kansas. Now, Wichita, I guess because of its pioneer culture, was a hotbed of enterprise. When I grew up there, there were a number of family-owned companies that were still headed by the people whose names were on them. Learjet, Beechcraft, Pizza Hut was founded there, Coleman Camping Equipment, Koch Industries, of course, which wasn't as big back then as it is now. But lots and lots of entrepreneurs, and they also were people who understood the underlying principles of enterprise, rights, and so on. And growing up, I thought that's how the whole world thought. So my parents and a group of other families got together in 1963. They started a school called Wichita Collegiate School, which was famous in libertarian circles in the 70s and 80s, and very unique in that it offered 4 years of Austrian economics in the high school level. So I went through high school. I had a really marvelous, gifted teacher, Mr. Hildebrand. He'd been a truck farmer until the age of 40, and then he went to college. Talk about a late bloomer going to college, and he went to Grove City. And then he became a teacher, and he was my history and economics teacher. And like von Mises, I adore history. Obviously, history and economics, if you're an Austrian, are inextricably intertwined. And I loved Mr. Hildebrand. The teachings he was unfolding really excited me. I'd spend hours outside of class talking to him about these ideas and just really caught on fire. So imagine my surprise when I went to college and declared economics as my major, and I sat in these math classes And I thought, when am I going to study economics? Well, despite Stanford's best efforts to turn me into a Maoist or a Marxist, it didn't work. I had been very well grounded in the Austrian. And then in the late 70s, I found myself living in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Brazil at that time had its first democratically elected president following 20 years of military dictatorship. So I got to experience firsthand Mises's teachings about the corrupting influence of government in the economy. But it worked. Again, humans are able to organize themselves very well no matter what kind of structure we're living under. And so despite the fact that it was a very dictatorial type of economy, people had worked their way around it. So if you had to get a permit for something, which you had to get a permit for everything, you'd go downtown to where the government buildings are, and out on the sidewalks would be all these guys wearing sandwich boards, advertising their services as a despachante, which is a dispatcher. So you'd give them the money, and they knew who to go see and whose palms to grease, and they'd come back and you'd have your permit, your driver's license or your car registration or your work permit or your residency, whatever. And it wasn't terribly expensive. There was a lot of competition. It actually worked quite well. So I came back to the United States. I actually moved into my home here in California on January 20th, 1980, the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated and the American hostages were released in Iran. It was kind of culture shock. Welcome to America. I spent the 1980s as an entrepreneur, a small business owner in San Francisco, and learned about the corrupting influence of government in the economy here at home, and discovered that we don't have a free market, and we don't have capitalism. Very early warning that it was going to be a problem. This was a teleshopping grocery delivery business in San Francisco, and we had a warehouse in Bayview Hunters Point, and it was really a entrepreneurial venture. We didn't have any money, so instead of buying fancy shelving flow racks like most warehouses had, we hired this young guy, and we bought lumber, and he was going to build us shelves. Well, when the lumber delivery truck came, right behind it was a car with a union representative in it following the truck to find out where this lumber was going, what job was being done, and if union labor was involved in it. So that was an early sort of cue that things were going to be interesting. And I ended up realizing that I spent a lot of the time in my business not figuring out how to serve my customers better or provide a better service at a lower cost, but dealing with government bureaucrats that were being used at the behest of vested interests. So, and I could talk for hours about the joys of dealing with these people, and they had utter and complete power. They could arbitrarily come and tell you what you had to do, and there's nothing written. It's just depending on what they decide the rule is today, and you just have to do it if you're not politically connected, which of course I wasn't. So we had one employee who had a little drug problem, and she'd get upset with her boss, and she'd call OSHA in retaliation, and then they'd show up, and she'd be in my office crying, so apologetic. She didn't mean to do it, and then we learned, then the doozy was the USDA inspector, and it became very apparent through a series of kind of negotiations over several weeks that this guy was there at the behest of, shall we say, established corporations that weren't interested in seeing a new kind of grocery business take off and succeed. So that was a very interesting experience for an idealistic young Austrian businesswoman who thought the world was going to be this wonderful thing that von Mises had talked about. And, well, he does talk about this, and it's true. But the highlight of that period was my parents came to visit me, and my father asked me to take him to a place called the Pacific Institute. He wanted to meet this guy, David Theroux, about a book. So we went by, and David happened to be in, and he brought us in. We all sat there. And I just sat in that office flabbergasted. I had no idea that such an organization could exist that was working to further the ideas of liberty, the ideas that I love so much. And I was just I was so excited that there was hope, that I wasn't alone in this quest to see the world the way it should be. So I started going to events. David introduced me to IHS, which was in Menlo Park at that time, and I'd go to their Friday afternoon beer and wine things. We started going to the Mont Pelerin Society meetings and other things. And it was really wonderful to learn that there were people in this world who shared these principles and these ideas and were working to see them become a reality. Well, at Pacific, David always kind of had there was a certain tension between his vision of doing really totally principled, uncompromising is what I meant, projects on to further these ideas, and kind of the board, which were nice guys, but they were sort of Republican businessmen who were looking for, deregulation on the margin, and what's all these, books and ideas and so on and so forth. And David really wanted to pursue an academic, hardcore, totally principled program. So eventually in the mid-'80s, he and the research director left Pacific, and a couple of their board of directors joined them. And he started independent. Well, unique of any of these organizations, he had no deep pockets whatsoever, no backing. So it was really the first garage think tank, we call it. Very much so. He did it out of his basement and worked long, long hours. So this is in the mid-'80s, and he's going around to these businessmen and women trying to raise money, and they're saying, why do we need another think tank? Reagan's in the White House, big government's been beaten, deregulation is the order of the day, and so on and so forth. Of course, his first project was Regulation in the Reagan Era, which is a book showing that, in fact, under Reagan, government got bigger, regulation expanded, etc. Just to back up a second, about the last project David did at Pacific was he got Bob Higgs's manuscript for Crisis in Leviathan, and worked with him on the production of that. And as one of the rounds of that, sent the manuscript to Murray Rothbard, who wrote Bob a 20-page, single-spaced, typewritten letter of suggestions, readings, other material he wanted to consider, and whatever. And Bob was just like, whoa. I mean, he'd known about some of these things, but clearly not the depth and breadth. And I think David said at first, he was just kind of like, what is this? I can never get through this. But over the years, it's really helped inform. It not only helped inform and make Crisis in Leviathan a better book, which is, any of you have not read Crisis in Leviathan, you have to read it, but has informed his subsequent career, and I think made it the deeper and more insightful and really principled scholar that Bob is. So David spent 25 years building up independent. We're having our 25th anniversary gala in November, and we have invitations, information there, and Bob is one of our honorees. And it's been a wonderful, after I sold my businesses, I eventually joined him full time, and have really enjoyed getting to be part of the fight for freedom and getting to be part of an organization that all of its studies are adhere to these core principles expounded especially by Mises, but many other of the wonderful Austrians and others. And the wonderful thing about rooting your work and your life in something like the analysis and the really insightful core economic principles that von Mises revealed to us is that when earth-shattering things happen, you know what's right? You don't have to think, well, I wonder if we should be for this or against it. So, for example, when something like 9/11 comes along, David and many of us knew immediately, and being rooted in von Mises and having been familiar with things like Bob Higgs's Crisis in Leviathan, that this was going to be the grandfather of every excuse forever for the expansion of the warfare welfare state. And David, to his credit, on the afternoon of September 11th, 2001, against a few protests, he insisted that we put a statement on our homepage saying, we're we give deep condolences to those who have been harmed by these attacks. However, do not allow this to be used as an excuse for the expansion of the state into areas that have nothing to do with security and have everything to do with the expansion of government power. And we refined that and released it 2 days later as a press release. We immediately put out a proposal that the constitutionally provided letters of marque and reprisal be used to send privateers to bring Osama bin Laden and others to justice. Ron Paul introduced that in Congress. Of course, it didn't go anywhere, and we all know what happened after 9/11, and here we are today. And we have seen also the difference between those of us who admire von Mises, read him, took his lessons to heart, versus those who came into the liberty movement perhaps out of some other motive and some other grounding. And we've seen a deep divide, especially immediately after 9/11, of those who held true to the principles of individual liberty and rights of each and every individual, and those who said, let's turn sand into silicon and let's bomb the bejesus out of them and let's support the growth of the state and so on. And hopefully we're learning that wasn't really a great thing to do, and hopefully people can come back and learn principle. There's a final illustration of von Mises, and I never met him, obviously, but he was, from my knowledge of him, extremely uncompromising and always held true to his beliefs. As I mentioned, we've been fortunate over the years to attend a lot of meetings of the Mont Pelerin Society, which is currently being held in Istanbul, and obviously we're not there. And there met and were with an astounding, great people of this movement, the great thinkers, the great academics, all of whom I admire. I mean, I will take jabs at people, but I'm all for anybody who's trying to move us towards liberty. And after we get rid of the state, then we can squabble about who's pure and who's not. But every time I ever heard Milton Friedman speak at the Mont Pelerin Society meeting, he told this story every single time he spoke there. And it's about the very first meeting of the Mont Pelerin Society meeting. And for those who don't know, Hayek, after World War II, when he saw socialism just raging and was wondering what people of the thinkers could do to fight this, called together a meeting of people in Switzerland to get together and talk about what can we do to combat this. And so it was Hayek and von Mises, and Friedman was a very young man at the time, but he was also there, and probably about 40 people there, David? So they're talking, and again, we both admire Friedman, we both admire Hayek a lot, but they were a little squishy on the edges about the state. And we can imagine sort of the conversation that was taking place about perhaps the utilitarian steps that could be taken. And von Mises stood up and he said, "You're all socialists," and he stormed out of the room. And that's my kind of guy.
That was wonderful. I can't top that. I'm just going to say again, thank you all for coming. We have the room for another 50 minutes or so, and I'd be happy to introduce anybody to anybody if I can. But we have maybe a little bit more food, not much, but some more wine. So please just enjoy the rest of the evening. And there are a few small announcements, though. Mary mentioned that there are some invitations to the Independent Institute's gala. Mention the three speakers.
Lech honorees, Lech Walesa.
Lech Walesa of Poland, okay?
Yeah, Mario Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian, he won the
Nobel Prize.
Nobel last year, and he's been very courageous in speaking out against authoritarianism across Latin America. And then Robert Higgs, the great Higgs.
Exactly. Exactly. So those are there. They have some other literature there. Beth has some flyers for her Black Ribbon Project. on healthcare. And I have some cheapo flyers about our next event for a month from now with the two speakers, Alexander McCabe of the Students for Liberty, as well as Marcia Enright, who's doing summer seminars in preparation for creating a Montessori method college in the Midwest called the Reason, Individualism, and Freedom Institute. And it's quite an interesting proposition. And we also, of course, have some books by Ernie Lewis and what Mary said on what happened after 9/11, and in particular the Patriot Act. If you don't know too much about what that's doing to our society, Ernie's book will just blow your mind, and I highly urge you to give it a shot. So, thank you all.
Do we have any Q&A, or do we have time?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. We definitely have time for Q&A.